Hello and welcome to the first episode of the third season of Reinforcement Talking, the UCL AI Society podcast. We're joined today by Maisha Jemison. Maisha is a PhD student in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science. She's a Gates Cambridge Scholar, a graduate student fellow at the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence, and her PhD research looks at how Cambridge Analytica, including its parent company, built scientific credibility without achieving transparency into their science and methodologies. So, hi Maisha, how you doing?
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, great. So let's just start by talking about what got you into what you're working on, particularly the AI side. So with your PhD research.
Yeah, I would say that my academic career has been it's ventured different directions to say the least. But I've for a while had an interest in looking at both the social sciences and the sciences. And I think when I was in undergrad, I started taking classes that allowed me to see the relationship between both. And so whether that was environmental science classes that were cross-listed with African studies or um, uh, design classes that looked at not only the technical aspects of the work, but also how communities engage with what you might be producing. I think that's what generally got me in this science, tech, and society space. And then when I moved from undergrad to do my master's, I was able to delve much more deeply into the relationship people have with technology, specifically that youth have with technology and how it can be something that we can govern to do the tasks that we need to do or to make our lives simpler, but also, seeing it as something that in some cases governs us. And so I think that those questions that I was thinking about in my master's got me, thinking about even bigger questions in my PhD. And I think bringing it more specifically to AI, I was just interested in tech broadly, but I kept going to events or logging on to, these virtual lectures at other institutions, but also just like reading the news and seeing how more and more people were paying attention to artificial intelligence, more and more people were leveraging tools that incorporated it. And so I wanted to dig a bit deeper into that. And then once I think after reading a couple of articles and looking at the work of Cambridge Analytica, which forms part of my dissertation, I realized that there was a lot more there that I wanted to investigate. And so whether that's looking at AI and political elections, looking at, tech and other digital tools more broadly in political elections, that's, kind of the journey that led me there.
Yeah. So let's zoom in on what you've been talking about. So you've been obviously looking at AI and political elections. So how do you think that modern day AI has accentuated the biases and negatively impacted how the electoral system works?
Jumping right in. Okay, yeah. It's a question. I'm laughing because I'm like, oh, like we're not going to ease into this. We're going to hop straight into it. But I think it's so important because for so
Yeah.
many for so many countries, this year is such an important year. So I'm, talking to you while I'm based in Ghana. Ghana's elections the first weekend of December. I'm from the U.S. The U.S. has elections in November, and so these questions of how technology is being used, whether to advance one candidate or deter another, whether it's to help more people register to vote or to disenfranchise groups of people. There are so many ways that AI can find its way into this work. And I think when it comes specifically to political bias, I mean that encapsulates so many things. From my particular work and the research that I've done in Kenya, the research I've done in Nigeria, we look at it more from a standard of or a standpoint of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and these ways that incorrect information or information disorder can be so disorienting for populations and have really detrimental effects. Sometimes those effects aren't directly related to the information that's put out, but it's real. It's the deep fakes of candidates aligning themselves with terrorist organizations. It's the way that you have, bots on platforms like Twitter or Facebook that are putting out false information that a lot of people buy into. And I think though it can have those negative effects for people who maybe don't know how to fact check, who look at something and think it's real, and as deepfakes get more and more powerful, they look more and more real, and it's so much more difficult for us to discern fact from fiction in like those contexts. So I think it has provided a way to mass produce political bias across nations and across different sectors of the population. It doesn't discriminate by class or race or gender or these other categorizations. It's pretty prevalent. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great answer, comprehensive one. Talking about how you said it could mass produce political bias, do you think there's differences in how it affects people in different cultures? For example, how it affects a person in Nigeria versus Argentina, or maybe even the United States, where you're from?
I do, and I don't want to pretend to know all of those contexts super well. About I'll just speak on like a couple of things. I know in some of the materials that you shared, there's like the example in like Argentina with this video being put out and it being labeled AI generated, but people still having a lot of people still believing it, even though there was like kind of that disclaimer. And it reminds me of the disclaimers that you see on something like cigarettes, where it's like might cause lung cancer, but people are still using that item. And so this kind of way that someone is saying, "Oh, I put AI generated, so all the liability falls away from me,"
Yeah.
is not helpful, but also like quite disingenuous. And even saying it's AI generated is so vague. Like, does that mean that the images are AI generated? Does it mean just like the voice from the video is? Does it mean a script was developed to that was maybe the people in the video are real, but there was a script that was used, I don't know, like ChatGPT or some other like platform
Mm,
to construct whatever the content of that is. And so I think um, it does have real effects on elections because people believe the information, because some people, there are contexts where people don't know what AI is or how powerful it is and like what it's capable of. And so we're going to see that across differing levels of digital literacy. We're going to see that across different religious groups, or whatever like those contexts might be. So for example, even whether it's more broadly this like guess idea of a political bias, where you see in like Nigeria but also in Kenya these examples of videos that are fear mongering. And so one of the things we know on the continent is that tribalism is like quite real, and it has real impact for people's day-to-day social lives, whether it dictates how they engage with one group, where they do business, where they live, what languages they speak. There are a lot of ways that different identities can impact like their day-to-day lives, but it
mm,
also is often grounded in historical relationships between these like various like ethnic groups. And so if there is already an existing tension that exists, whether I guess in Nigeria's case, where maybe it's between Christians and Muslims, or the North and the South, or the Yoruba versus Igbo versus Edo versus whatever other group, um, when these organizations or individuals, or whatever person is doing this work, when they go into when they're developing these videos, or they're developing this like misinformation, it's often, or I would say disinformation in this case, um, it's often grounded in an understanding of how the social dynamics in a local space are. And so it's
yeah.
not, on a random Tuesday that they decide, oh, wow, I'm going to say that if Muhammadu Buhari becomes president, Boko Haram will take over the country. It's grounded in knowing that there are already those regional, religious, and ethnic tensions that exist, and knowing that you can exploit those with false videos that give people a sense of fear based on one particular outcome that you're trying to present. And so it does impact people in those ways. I think the maybe tribalism aspect doesn't work as well in the US, just because of, I think, one, the US is like history of having, genocided most of the population of like Native Americans, to where that population is currently like an ethnic minority within the country. But it does play along, for example, racial lines, and it's not just things that are generated by AI. It's the cartoons that during the Obama years painted, Michelle Obama as anything but, an intelligent Black woman, whether that was as a man or as in like angry individual, or in some cases, even equating her to an animal. And so when we think about what can be done in comics, something that's very, simple, manual, we have to multiply that by, multiple factors of 10 when we think about the capabilities that AI can have to mass produce that. And so you might think in the earliest stages of or earliest examples of information disorder that you have one person who says one thing that's incorrect, and they share it with, the person next to them and the person next to them. That the spread of that information is going to be quite slow compared to, oh, now we're in the digital era where I could have just gone over next door to my neighbor to say this thing that isn't true. Now I can go online and I have, 30 people or tens of thousands of people who are like receiving that information. Now you move beyond this, like in digital era, into this in the current era that we're in, we say, oh, now it's beyond just what digital tools can, these like social media platforms can do, or these tools that allow, anyone to produce can do. It's now moving into tools that are, powered to produce more information at faster rates and for much broader audiences than we could have imagined in previous generations.
Yeah, I think you've touched across a lot there. I think context is very important, and some would say that AI is only really as harmful as you allow it to be. But when that context is removed and when something's presented to you as fact, it's very hard
Yeah.
not to believe it if it seems convincing enough.
I was going to comment on something you just said of
Yeah.
even thinking about it's only as powerful as you allow it to be. It depends on who that you is. If that you is someone
Yeah.
who's used to bunking, fact checking, um, and like that sort of work, then the impact that that piece of information is going to have on them is going to be drastically reduced because they're primed to recognize it. They have the skill set to do that fact checking, and they're operating in a totally different environment, or rather mindset, when it comes to that work. If you send it to someone who's maybe that active on, I don't know, social media, who doesn't have that same skill set, then it's going to have a very different impact. And so the you who gets to determine how they allow this information to impact them differs across so many different factors, from what I mentioned
Yeah.
before of education, from that digital literacy, and even from how active they are in politics. There's some people that are going to see information who aren't invested and don't really care to engage, and so the impact is going to be minimal because they're already set in their ways. And I think that's going on a bit now, but I think that's an important thing to recognize, because even when you think about the work of Cambridge Analytica, and how Nigel Oakes and other folks from the company, and Alexander Nix and other folks from the company talk about their work, they're often not looking for the people who are already set in their ways, who are going to
Yeah.
vote strictly along political party lines. They're not looking for the Democrat in the states that is going to vote for Kamala, voted for Biden, voted for Obama, so on and so forth. They're looking for the people whose opinions they know can be swayed, and they're doing the surveying and the psychographic research to understand who those people are. And so I think there are a lot of factors we have to consider when we're thinking about this information.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. So let's now discuss how AI has influenced how traditional media presents news. So the article I shared earlier was one from the Windsor Center, which argues that AI poses risk to authoritarian and democratic politics, talks about how it's interfered in cases like Maisha's mentioned with, deep fake videos, faked audios in elections such as Argentina's and in even in the US election currently. But it also goes on to discuss AI and authoritarian regimes such as in Russia, where they're using AI effectively as a disinformation generator to erode trust in other regimes. So,
Hmm.
how do you think the media is handling that, and how do you think the media can recover from such, eroding in trust when it comes to misinformation being generated at such a rapid rate?
Yeah, I think that's important. These are important questions to consider. I want to say I went to, oh, Maria Ressa, who's this, award-winning, I want to say Nobel Peace Prize winning journalist, who does a lot of work with political um, information disorder, particularly in the Philippines. But with her work, she's also created a number of collectives that have or coalitions rather that have started to put their heads together to try to fight disinformation and broadly like information disorder. And some of the things that she and other journalists talk about is just how much more difficult their work is made because of these tools, and how much more information they even have to go back and verify, not because they've like necessarily put it out, but because there's so much out there, and their responsibility is to get information, accurate information out to the
Yeah.
public. And when there is much more um, nonsense in the midst of the facts that they're trying to collect, it's additional steps for them to do their work. And I think you have people who are trying to do this well. So the Center for Democracy and Development, which is based in Abuja, Nigeria. You have other organizations like Dubawa, is also Nigerian based, that are doing the work of fact checking and are even working alongside journalists to navigate, what is a really tough climate to be working in. And I they're doing that work, but I think they're also recognizing that they have to do that work in collaboration with one another, because it takes all of them, getting together to fight the information disorder that's been kind
Yeah.
of polluting spaces, and especially during periods of elections where we call it, like, these are like high stakes periods where that disinformation is going to be like quite common. That whether it's small things, I wouldn't say small things, whether it's something as simple as people telling voters that, oh, actually, this year you don't mark, the ballot next to the candidate you want to win. You mark it next to the candidate you don't want to win, and that's how you get, people who are uninformed from, the opposition party to vote for your candidate, essentially. And so, like, these sorts of, with all of these factors at play, it's one of the reasons why journalists have been collaborating with these organizations, but also why the work they do to pre-bunk ahead of elections or ahead of major events. um, on the side of social media, oh, this one is hard. It's hard. It's hard. And I think, like, even seeing what CDD does in their office, Center for Democracy and Development, it was quite amazing to see how the work that they're doing to track um, people who are like um, suddenly starting to put out lots of information disorder, and who are likely doing that because they're being incentivized by someone who has like negative intentions, and whether those are individuals that could be like political officials, or people who have a particular investment in seeing a specific candidate win, whether it's agencies that are coming from Russia, or Israel, or other places. It's something that is challenging the original purpose of some of these tools. When we think about social media, it's an opportunity for people to connect with each other more frequently, and in a different like platform. It's the ability to put publish information out on the internet and be able to share that with like broader audiences. And it likely, I won't speak for the like the intentions of the original developers, but it likely had relatively benign ambitions and like in this beginning. And so now that we see, okay, yeah, we have this ability to publish, and there aren't these barriers to access for putting information out there. You don't have to worry about going through maybe a newspaper to advertise for your event, because you can do that on their own social media platform. At the same time, because there is this democratization of access to publishing,
Yeah.
information and to sharing that information, you now have to worry about everyone who doesn't have like the best intentions, and you have to worry about how fast the information they share is spreading. I think there was like a study done by, I want to say MIT, where essentially the conclusion, one of the conclusions was that disinformation spreads 6 times faster than the truth. And I mean, even in like probably our, day-to-day instance, day-to-day lives, we can say, oh, the gossip happening, at school, spreads much more quickly than the truth. And so when you're working with these
Mm.
organizations that are doing this fact checking, that are trying to fight information disorder, their their work is really cut out for them. You find a piece of information that you question, you have to do the work of fact checking it. Sometimes that can mean literally calling political offices to verify, did the president go to this place, or did the president do this thing. I think one of the examples that um Luke Lamada gave us from CDD was that there was they like literally had to call like the vice president's office to fact check something. And they have that particular access because they built that reputation within Nigeria as this body for that is trustworthy and that is like seeking the truth. But imagine how many pieces of information we encounter on a regular basis that we don't have the ability to just call the vice president's office for. And imagine the communities that don't have that access. And so there's so many, I think, challenges at play, but those are exacerbated and really fueled by uh, platforms like social media that allow people to spread this information disorder much more quickly.
Yeah, I think you've really explained why such a big issue. I'll give a benign example. For example, a few months ago, I think at one of Kamala Harris's rallies, there was a fake rumor spread on Twitter that, you know, Superstar was going to perform at one of her rallies. And eventually, this got, re-corroborated as allegedly Taylor Swift. And it got to a point where reputable news sources were reporting this as fact without actually checking it, and just quote of one Twitter X account that had just made this up. So this is obviously a benign example, but when it comes to something way more serious, one that could actually influence an election, this is why it's really important to tackle these, I feel.
Yeah. And then I think to that point, there were probably a couple of people like, whoa, is in the comments like, oh, is this true? Or what? I didn't hear about this.
Mhm.
Like there are the moments where people are questioning like what they're seeing in front of them, but we have to move beyond just questioning something and actually doing the work to determine if it's like fact or fiction. I think that even in our like social media interactions is important, because sometimes you'll see someone commenting like, I hope it's not true, but, and they'll still continue on the thread as if it were. And I'm like, oh, let's see if it's true and then develop an opinion about it. But developing an opinion about something that we haven't confirmed isn't as helpful.
Yeah. When it comes to the use of AI, do you think it ever crosses ethical lines of free speech? Or do you think it's always still considered that or can be treated as such?
I think it depends. I think in the context of so this is the example I want to use. So there was a case of an Ethiopian professor um, who was being accused of being affiliated with a group that was perceived to be, terrorist. And there was a page on Facebook. And granted, this is a little bit outside of the AI, but I think in general with like disinformation, there's a page on Facebook that kept pushing this narrative that he was part of this organization, and there were like tens of thousands of people engaging with the content, or at least part of getting into being part of like the group. And there were multiple times when his family came to Facebook to complain and ask them to like pull it down. And eventually, like, this man was killed by people presuming that he was part of that group, and it made him a target. And even though people have the free will to say what they would like to, the context and even the constitutionality of like that free speech differs, depending on what that country's like legislation is. But imagine someone, but even in this case, you seeing, someone who was minding their business, being a chemistry professor, who was alleged to have, have had this affiliation, who ended up, dying as a consequence of it. And what justice is there for, their family? And even after he died,
Yeah.
the Facebook group is still up. And so you think about like those contexts, it's like, okay, like what does it mean for us to have accountability for information disorder, and what does that look across geographic context? But imagine, I think in that same case, if there was, something untrue, which we see on multiple, even in one of the examples you sent, where someone is being accused of being a part of a like terrorist organization. So I think it was, and the video was being shared by, the president's staff, people that you would expect to be
Yeah.
reputable
Yeah.
sources,
In
or
Turkey, yeah.
yeah, or to have the um, the knowledge to not spread information that they hadn't, verified, especially given their political roles. And so I think that when it comes to spaces like maybe like how information is moderated, especially on platforms, there are times where um, these technologies, AI even more specifically, can cross like ethical lines of free speech when it puts people in danger. That's conceptually for me, that's a clear line that's being crossed. But even the notion
Yeah.
of danger and what harm is caused by information disorder is something that you don't see considered um, in the same approach across, different national governments. So I think when it raises like bigger questions about, what it means for someone to have privacy, or what does it mean, to cause harm, and how is that definition of harm being interpreted? What responsibility is there for the person who spreads the information, or who creates, who does the original post, and then for the people who share it, or like there are a lot of questions at play that we haven't fully addressed.
Yeah. So, all right, moving on to another topic in the future of politics and how we could interact with the electoral system in the future. Chatbots. Um, One case of a psycho chat, which is basically an AI chatbot which reflects the views and ideas of the person it's meant to emulate, was made last year. It emulated the psychologist Martin Seligman, and this was done all without his consent. Yet when he used it and when his wife tried it out, it was, it almost convinced his wife really that it worked. Do you think that we'll see something similar with politicians in the future? And how do you think that could affect campaigns and how we interact with politicians, maybe on a personal level?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more and more of it in the future, particularly in politics. I think that, but I do think there are useful ways to employ these chatbots as well. And so I guess on the things we might be afraid of are like just false information being shared on someone's like particular, stance on an issue, or um, the output that they receive being something that maybe was not explicitly what they said, but something maybe that is interpreted as being like implicitly stated. And so I think we have to like walk a very thin line when it comes to that. Like we do want people to be able to maybe have a chat bot where they can ask questions about, oh, what does this candidate think about like this issue, and like that bot is able to tell them exactly what that is. Maybe it's a direct excerpt from a platform that they publicly shared, or a speech that they've given. But we don't want it to get to the point to where people want to delegate their like critical thinking and even their engagement with political figures to just
Yeah.
speaking to the chatbot. So at a moment where they might have gone to a town hall previously or watched a debate, now they're just going to the bot. That's not the type of environment that we want to see. And then I'm curious about, in that context, about the points where maybe a politician's views aren't consistent. And so which responses like the chatbot give, And if, and does it note the inconsistency, and does it share that with the public? I think one of the more recent things is, in the States, was the kind of quiet removal of, the like fighting against the death penalty in the US from, the like Democratic, platform. And it's, part of the platform that we've seen for, um, I don't want to say generations, but at least for my almost 30 years of lifetime. And I think, uh, like, because these like ideas aren't always as fixed as we think they are, that there has to be, some sort of opportunity for either the responses that people are getting to be updated, but for people to still be encouraged, to like directly engage with the material that they're seeing. Are you checking for your like your the when someone's running for office, are you actually checking their platform? Are you voting just because it's on, your party lines? Like, what does it mean for us to be involved members of, people who are civically engaged, or, in politics, um, and how do we ensure that that engagement doesn't decrease just because there are easier ways to, quote unquote, easier ways for us to get the information we want.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think it could potentially simplify how we interact with our politicians, or at least find out what our politicians uh, are proposing if they come into office? And is that necessarily a good thing?
Um, I think it can be a good thing if someone wants a summary of, what, a particular politician's platform is, or maybe if there's an issue that they're curious about but don't fully understand, and they want to get that, context from, a bot. Like, I do think that these things can be tools. They don't have to always be perceived as, I think the people have a lot of fears when it comes to AI, and I think some of those are appropriate, and I think some of those are, um, very some of those, yeah, are not realistic, at least to our lifetime. And so, yeah, I do think, having, that information being simplified can be helpful, the same way that, my generation, like, if you wanted to quickly learn about a topic before delving deep, you probably went to Wikipedia. The same way people might engage in like forums such as, I don't know, Reddit, to get like some of their bits of information. But I think in general, trying to simplify things to the point that we lose like the richness of what's being said, isn't
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah,
In this case, so that we lose the richness of the context of, why someone said XYZ thing, or why they believe, this way, or they don't.
yeah. On the flip side, do you think that people interacting with these bots could also lead to some privacy concerns? Maybe politicians or whoever created the chatbot collecting data unlawfully, or using it in an unethical manner. And how do you think that people can avoid this sort of situation, or rather being just seen as a statistic to improve the politicians' chances of getting a higher rating, for example?
Yeah. I guess for the last part of your question, I think there's always the risk, or like the possibility that, maybe even a politician, partners with an organization to say, okay, we want to have this chatbot to answer these questions, and this is, what we want to, train it on, so that it has, it's really close to, like the direct quotes from, this speech, or the direct quotes from, this part of our website, or this policy. Um, and I think, that can, obviously be a tool in some aspects. It could also lead to politicians saying, oh, people are only asking the chatbot questions about these things. Maybe we don't actually have to like push forward these parts of like the platform, and it could, result in some things being dropped off. But I don't think that this dissimilar from maybe like what happens when there are political polls going around. Like, there's always some way that, politicians are trying to get an understanding of what's happening within the people who are eventually going to be going to the polls, or even understanding, why, certain people don't. So I think that'll still be at play, but the way that, chatbots, it is when you're doing a political poll, you're not asking it questions. There's a specific line of questions that it's going to ask you. With the chatbot, it's flipped. It's the electorate that has the opportunity to like pose all of the questions. And so I think it might, kind of
Yeah.
reshape how we think about like getting a clear idea of like what general opinions are within the populace. And about there the question about like privacy and I again my answers will probably differ because my contexts are quite different from yeah, quite regionally focused, but I think I think it depends, and I think it's also it's based on the person and how much of their privacy they're willing to give up knowingly and unknowingly. It depends
Mhm.
on what the policies are related to data privacy, or even what it means to like have ownership of your, I guess, personal data, or your personal information, or your intellectual like property. It depends on like what those like definitions are, and so I can give kind of a broad answer that I do think that there are people who are actively working to get people to take more ownership over their data. I think about Joy Buolamwini, who runs the Aboriginal Justice League. I think about Tenda Gebru, who most of us know from her time at Google, and then the what I would call the unfair like fire termination of her as well. Like we have these people that are doing like really good work to make people take that ownership back, and so I'm hoping that that's something that happens. But I do think there will continuously be more incentives that make people want to release some of what they probably would have held close in past times. And I don't think politicians are exempt from that, but I do think there'll be a bit more specific about how they tailor um, these chatbots, and probably be more likely to um, have more agency over what chatbots get developed, or what virtual twins get developed, or whatever it is, so that they can leverage it for like their intents and purposes.
Going on to just a holistic view, really, do you think there are any positives to the use of AI in politics?
Yeah, I feel like the positives are the things I don't usually focus on. But they are there. They are there. And I think about it, even I've mentioned like fact checking quite a bit, because there are ways that organizations are leveraging AI to like assist in that fact checking. And fact checking is something, as I mentioned, like the fake news spreads a lot faster than the truth. And so how are you going to catch up with all of this news? Like there are tools that are being developed, that have been developed, that assist in like fact checking. There are even WhatsApp tools that you can ask a specific question, and it'll give you its general analysis, and it'll also give you Dubala has one, like a text app on WhatsApp, and it will give you some sources. And I think that's the easiest way for people to be able to check information, particularly related to like Nigerian politics. And so I do think that it can be useful. I think if they're leveraged as if they're properly developed and leveraged as tools, yes. Do I think that the negatives outweigh the positives? Um, I do think so. And I think it's just because there are probably a lot more, people with nefarious intentions than there are with people who are, um, yeah, trying to do the right thing, and are, able to like invest their time into doing that.
Yeah,
And even from like economic standpoint, when you see these companies that get invested in like these tools, uh, it can be if it can be a lot more tempting to use these tools for um, purposes that don't benefit the general public than it is for ones that do.
yeah, that WhatsApp tool be very useful. I've seen a lot of misinformation on WhatsApp even here. So, how do you think we prevent the negative aspects of AI use in politics? Is it through policy? Is it through education? Is it through a mix? Is it through what?
Yeah. I'm like, oh, have you read my notes? Because yeah, policy and education are somewhere on here too. Um, I do think that those are helpful. I really do. And I know that they won't solve all of our issues, but I think we have to start from somewhere, and that somewhere should be something that's as close to impacting people as, can be. And when I think about that, I'm thinking about, yeah, the like digital media literacy. I think we talk about a lot how it's whether it's an older generation doesn't know how to use like this technology, or even our current generation. Some people are versed in social media, and some people aren't. Like the differences between how we engage with information, especially the information that we have access to online, is so broad that I think it is helpful to put people on a relatively equal playing field of understanding, what's available, what the harms are, how they can, protect themselves, and how best they can, use those things. And the challenge is ensuring that people are actually willing to do the work to get there. You think about how often people actually read the terms and conditions for something, or how many people, open up a box of something they need to build and throw, the instructions aside. Like it can be so tempting to just jump into something thinking that, oh, I have enough knowledge and like skill sets to, determine whether something is real or not. But even we held a workshop earlier this month called ordering information, and it was looking at fact checking and pre-bunking tools and methods in West Africa, like specifically. And we had someone who mentioned actually one of the examples that a presenter used as like a deep fake video was something that someone at the workshop had seen, and it actually
Mm,
believes. And I'm like, well, it's helpful to know that that was something you believed, and that now you're in a space where you're doing the work to develop these like develop and understand these tools and like methodologies, going forward. But imagine how many other people saw it, believed it, and will never have the opportunity, or sometimes never have the desire to actually figure out how to pre-bunk or debunk, or the questions they should be thinking about to make them like critically assess something. So
mm, mm.
um, so yeah, I do think about that a lot, that digital media literacy, and I think it starts from young. Because while we focus on the conversation with AI um, and politics, which politics isn't something that the average maybe primary school student is thinking about, but
Yeah.
they think that that's too. It's the deep fakes of, and you see it in different spaces. I saw a case study in Spain where like young girl's photo had been like her face had been taken and kind of prompted onto some like X-rated material, and it was being like shared
Yeah.
out of school. This is a young girl, and it's
Yeah.
not real footage, but yet like um face, and is being used on like that material, even though it's not something that like she actually did. And you can imagine how like negative that impact would be for her. And not that I'm suggesting the students go and fact check that. I think they should, you need to call the police, because that's child
Yeah.
pornography. But those sorts of things where there are people who were watching it and sharing it, and weren't even stopping to think like, oh, this is wrong, like this is something that happened to this girl, even if they thought it was real, like, oh, I shouldn't be seeing this, or oh, this shouldn't be happening to this girl. And the younger that especially with more and more like youth who have iPads, or who know how to use phones, or who know how to talk to Alexa, we have to also do the if we're going to allow them to be exposed to those materials so early, and those technologies so early, then we also have to be incredibly mindful about guiding them in like its best use, but also being able to like monitor like what their use is as well. And there are people even at Cambridge at Leverhulme who are um, looking at this. One of my colleagues, Nisha, is essentially looking at the relationship between that like youth have with these like social AI and these like chatbots, and it's incredibly important in a space that's like under researched as well. I think a lot of my work has centered around, trying to understand the story of Cambridge Analytica within sub-Saharan Africa, especially within the political elections. But through that work, it's become so much more important to me to not only focus on that aspect, but to also understand generally how digital technologies are making their ways into elections, whether that's through governments, whether that's through the citizenry, whether it's through, foreign corporations like, Cambridge Analytica. And so as people are going through their own research or like their own research interests, especially those who are also considering PhDs. I hope that in their work of understanding AI, whether it be in politics or in education or whatever facet, that they're considering it in the context of like broader technologies. So I think we're currently focusing on AI a lot. Um, and it's allowing other technologies that can have similarly negative impacts to kind of fall by the wayside in our attention. So yeah, consider these technologies in relation to one another and like the networks of technologies that even had to exist for AI to now be running as it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say so. And with that, we come to the end of the podcast. My final question is, if you had to describe AI's influence in politics with just one word, how do you describe it?
Oh my gosh. AI's influence in politics. That's in one word, not even one phrase. Ooh, can I give you like three words? Three separate words.
Three words? All right, we'll do three words. We'll do three words.
The things that come to mind, I mean, scary was the first thing that popped into my head, but the second was reversible.
Mm,
And the third was the third. Hmm. Yeah, I was actually just say those two words. Yeah, scary, but also reversible. I don't want people to like think about this podcast or like my research and say like, oh, like we're doomed. Like there's work to be done that we can engage in, and I think if enough people are committed to it, and then we'll get to the sorts of outcomes that we want to see. But I think it takes one, from it takes making the first step of actually like challenging these tools, um,
yeah,
and holding people accountable. And that accountability isn't just that our government should have legislation, or that I don't know, Facebook should have you know this this additional number of moderators on their platform. It means that even us as individuals who use these tools or are subject to these tools also have to engage in that accountability ourselves.
yeah. Thank you, Maisha. Yeah, and that's the end of the episode. I've been Anthony and Chi. Thank you once again, Maisha, for coming on and discussing your research. Yeah, see you for the next episode.